Hello, world. My name is William Lowe, and I've had over 30 years of experience in advising investors about buying airplanes and many other things. I decided to start a YouTube channel, Critical Angle of Fact, to help people understand this market better, as well as the airline credit risk and the many other factors that drive it. We may also stray into some other areas too, since it's such a global business and affected by so many things. So, buckle up. In this video, we wanted to talk about the risks involved in investing in twin-aisle or wide-body airplanes. They have a built-in weight penalty versus the 150-seat kind of range of airplanes, which are single aisle or narrow bodies. This means that the break-even load factor is higher too, so you have a more difficult time making money. On the longer routes, these airplanes are basically a tanker for themselves. They're taking fuel all the way across, 8 or 10 hours to fly the last hour or two of the flight. And that is very inefficient, as we'll see. The recent generation airplanes have done a lot to get rid of this problem, and the 777's cargo capacity under the floor in the belly of the airplane is a very helpful risk mitigator. Lufthansa said, I think a year ago, that on some routes the cargo basically makes money already. So if there's any people in there, that's just icing on the cake, so marginal revenue. The market for the older wide bodies was already in a downturn before the lockdowns came along, and there's still more of them coming off of their first 12-year loan or lease. And we'll also go into the impact of aviation on the environment, and we can see that people have already been doing a great job at that. And we hope you enjoyed the video. This is a table taken from the report by Marcus Butzlaff that we'll put a link down in the intro so you can read the whole thing if you want. It's very interesting. But basically, for each of these three aircraft types, you can see the difference in the fuel weight necessary to fly from Frankfurt to Hong Kong. So the same flight for each of them, but look at this, 160,000 kilograms back in 1971 for the 747-200. Then in 1994, the 777-300ER can do it with 115,000 kilograms, still quite a bit. And the most recent one, A350-900, which first flew in 2013, only needs 90,000 kilograms to do the same flight. And I don't know of any better way to push back against climate change or global warming than to burn less fuel, because the less fuel you burn, the less emissions are involved as well. And so the modern wide bodies have really taken care of removing the weight penalty that used to be associated with these big airplanes. So here is a 777-300ER on the takeoff roll. Pretty amazing video. And thanks to FRA Productions for allowing us to use their videos in ours. And here you can see this huge airplane, massive engines, and pretty clean exhaust too for a 1996 airplane, when it first entered service, I mean. So aviation has already been doing a pretty good job. And they've continued to do so. Now we're going to get to see a 787. The most recent wide body, this is a -10. And they really have eliminated most of the weight penalty involved in these bigger airplanes. And also the noise, you can see the sharklets on the trailing end of the engine. That's to make sure that the hot air and the cold air mix together better, so it's actually quieter. So this airplane is not as big as the 777, and you can see the engines are also not so massive. And I think 787 is 50% composite by weight. And you can see again, very clean exhaust. This graph is a specific fuel range graph for the 777-200. And there's a lot more information here than it looks like. The thing is, the airplane has been loaded with just enough fuel for each of these distances across here. And this, on the y-axis, is the fuel flow in pounds per nautical mile. And you can see because of the taxiing and then the climb in the thicker air, the fuel flow in the very beginning is high, and as the distance increases, the airplane gets higher in the air, the engines are more fuel efficient, and we get down to about 26.5 pounds per nautical mile right here. It looks like the most efficient flight distance is about 2,500 or 2,400 maybe nautical miles. And from there, to go further, you need to load more fuel. And you can see as the distance gets out here to 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 nautical miles, we are really a tanker now. We're having to carry the fuel with us the whole way to fly the last 2 hours of the flight. And this is really a massive built-in weight penalty and cost penalty for the airlines too. So if you don't have enough people in the airplane, or they're not paying enough in terms of yield, you're going to have a hard time making money. And it seems like for a 777-300 it'd be about the same, just higher, no doubt, because it's a bigger, heavier airplane. And we want to talk about one more graph. So this is a graph for a bunch of different airplanes, so narrow bodies and wide bodies, in terms of fuel weight. And also the left axis over here is in percent, and the right one is in pounds of fuel. So the gray bar is the fuel weight for each airplane, and the blue bar is the fuel as a percent of the maximum takeoff weight, and this other bar is fuel as a percent of the operating empty weight. So what is that? It's a cool way to compare airplanes because they all have one, and it's a function of obviously the size of the plane, the fuel load. It's also a function of the density of the structure, so the strength of the structure, because some airplanes need to be built more robustly, I guess, than other ones. If you think about a wide-body twin-engine airplane, if you're going down the runway and you're not up to what they call V1 yet, so that's the decision speed. That's kind of a weird name because the decision's been made for you, really. If you're not going that speed yet, you need to stop on the remaining runway. If you are at V1 or above, you need to keep going if you lose an engine. So that means one engine has to be strong enough to lift that load up in the air, fly around, dump some fuel, come back and land again. So that's why a 777-300ER engine is so big. It's 18 feet in diameter, and a 737 fuselage will fit inside. And it has 115,000 pounds of thrust. So that compares to a KC-135 or 707 engine back in the 1950s had only 10,000 pounds of thrust. If they used water injection, it went to 13,000. So it's about 1/10 of the power of the 777 engine. So across the bottom, We start out with the old school 737-400, and then also the A320 classic airplane is on here too. And then there are the Neos, the A220 also is a geared turbofan. This is the older A321. And then we have the Neo and the interesting XLR, so extra long range, that will enter the market in 2024, I think. And further over here, we have the wide-body airplanes. And some of those are a little bit old school, like the 767 and the A330. Then we have Neos and the more modern 787 and A350s. And if you look at the 777, the fuel weight is 320, almost 321,000 pounds, which is about 41% of its max takeoff weight, which is 775. So even though it has the largest takeoff weight, it's nearly taking half again as much in fuel as it is itself. So here's the operating empty weight. So nearly 90% of the operating empty weight is going to be loaded in as fuel. Pretty amazing. And what's interesting is if you look at the XLR, it also, the fuel as a percent of the operating empty weight is pretty great because the weight is so much less. Obviously, it's a narrow-body airplane, but it also needs a lot of fuel, really, compared to itself to go the 4,700 nautical miles that it will be able to go. I included this table over here because I thought it would be interesting to see the relative fuel load and then the range of the airplane and how many seats are in there. The range and the seats are where people get the available seat miles, so kind of the production of the airplane. And you can see that the 777 is massively heavy in terms of fuel, and the more modern airplanes are still pretty heavy, but they have reduced the load quite a bit and can go further, not with the same amount of passengers though. And the 777 is really, the 787 is really more the size of the 767 from more back in the day. But it has a lot more range and a little more capacity too, with a bit more fuel too, but still a more productive airplane. And so if you look at the wide-body airplanes, some people are trying to compare aviation to cars and trucks too. I don't think that makes any sense, really. It's obvious that cars, everybody's moving people around, but cars don't have to go up in the air. They also don't have to go 8,000 nautical miles, and they don't have to take 90% of their weight almost in fuel. So it is, in my view, it's like comparing apples and buffaloes, really. And maybe one more thing about the XLR. Most wide-body flights around the world, the average length of a wide-body flight really is about 4,000 nautical miles. So some of these outrageous range figures are nice for some routes, but most of the time they're not necessary. So the XLR, especially because the transatlantic market is the world's, or has been up to now, the world's most profitable market. This airplane is very interesting. So it has a pretty good capacity for how big it is. But this amount of range and that fuel efficiency too will make it a huge competitor to the wide-body airplanes, and it'll be possible actually to operate 2 or 3 of these for the price of certain other wide-body airplanes. And you can see the fuel weight in pounds is way less than the twin-aisle airplanes. So even though the max takeoff weight is so much smaller, it's still up around nearly 40% fuel weight as a percent of the maximum weight. And you can see that the fuel percent of the operating empty weight approaches that of these much bigger airplanes. So it is, it's not that much more fuel efficient then, really. And that is where the next level of innovation will come about, and that will be the driver of the next generation of airplanes after the XLR. This is a picture of a KC-135 from back in the day, literally, so 1968 probably. And you can see in the background a B-52 that has 8 of these same engines, so it's going to be twice as bad. This is the water injection that we mentioned before, so it increases the density of the air going into the hot section of the engine so that it gets more power. But just for 3 minutes, so to get you off the ground, away from the ground, and then it goes back to the 10,000 pounds of thrust. But it's pretty clear that the modern day engines are way better than this, and they've done that also to reduce emissions, but also to make sure that the airlines could burn less fuel and make more money and buy more airplanes. So if you like the video, you can like or subscribe, and we'll be doing some more of these. Probably next one will be about break-even load factor, and we've got some interesting models that we can show you that have to do with the forecasting of future values of airplanes and also the IRR of an operating lease for an airplane. So take care. Be careful out there.